I had never felt that having a swimming pool right in the house could be so cool. It was a hot day, but we hardly felt it in the cool water. I splashed around and looked at the painting singing on the walls. I could hear upbeat music and the loud laughter of my friends diving. Once again, I smiled and I thought, these are the best summer holidays ever. Hey, my name is Billie and I'm 14 years old, and that summer promised to be the best one ever. My parents had just bought tickets and play on the trip, which meant that I could finally see the sea, and not just see it, but also swim in it. I started getting ready in advance. I chose a SIM site and I bought sad sunscreen. I was a little worried about the sharks I could meet in the sea. My best friend, Stacy, was preparing for the trip with me. He had met thanks to our parents who'd worked together. Stacy was almost 3 years older than me, and I was terribly proud of having such a grown-up, cool friend, even though she could sometimes see, let's say, hard to deal with. The preparations reached the final stage when summer began. I was really looking forward to the trip and even started thinking about what clothes I would take with me. And then I found out that we weren't going anywhere. Something had happened at my parents' work, which meant that all employees had to urgently postpone their vacations. Oh, it was absolutely devastated. I tried not to show it in front of my parents, but as soon as they turned away, I immediately ran to my room and I burst into tears. Less than 5 minutes after that, my phone vibrated. I picked it up and I heard Stacy's angry voice. Her trip had also been cancelled, and my friend Studded was furious. You should have heard her curse. I listened to her in silence and got more upset by the minute. Most of all, Stanley blamed her parents for their work that ruined everything. But I felt sorry for my mom and dad. They lost their vacation, too, and were probably just as upset as we were. Long story short, when I finally hung up, I was in a worse mood than ever, so I decided to do something that always made me feel better. I went to Miss Hill's antique shop. It was my favorite. I've been going there almost every day for several years at that point, and I was friends with Miss Hill, the owner. I would wander among the various old, beautiful pieces of furniture for hours, and while I was doing that, the elderly woman would tell me stories about the things that I saw. And well, when I got tired of walking, we would sit down and have tea, and Miss Hill would tell me stories about her youth. Unlike me, Mrs. Hill was in a wonderful mood that day. As soon as I came in, she started to tell me that she was going to visit her son in another state. Then she saw my face and asked what had happened while telling her I couldn't help it, and I burst into tears again. Even Mrs. Hill was going on vacation and I wasn't. It was pretty obvious that she felt sincerely sorry for me. So after thinking about it a little bit, she surprised me. How about I leave you the keys to my house while I'm away? You could come and water my orchids. You could also look at the antiques there. I own even more of them than you can see in the store, believe it or not. But that offer really improved my mood. I was so fascinated by old things that I couldn't help but feel so happy about the chance to see more of them. Mrs. Hill left a week later, and Stacy and I went on a tour of her house. You should have seen it. Not a house, but like an art gallery of some kind. Cool vintage vases, figurines, and all of the furniture looked like it came straight from a historical film. I walked through the numerous hallways with my mouth open, but Stacy didn't share my joy. She saw old things as useless junk, and that day she was unusually quiet. Only later that I found out that she'd been acting like that because she'd been coming up with a plan. Look what I found on the internet, she said, stung me. On the screen on her smartphone in the video, some guys had covered a room with polyethylene film, poured water in it, and swam around like it was a pool. Let's do the same. Miss Hill's house. There was so much enthusiasm and the voice in my friend, but so wanted to curl up and disappear. I really didn't like the idea of turning someone else's house into a swimming pool, but Stacy wouldn't back down. Day after day, he tried to convince me, coming up with all sorts of arguments, and to be honest, I knew that the idea was, in a way, pool. Neither Stacy nor I had swimming pools at home. My parents would never allow me to make something like that, and Mrs. Hill's house seemed to be perfect for creating a swimming pool in all those long hallways that would be easy to cover with film and then fill with water. And long story short, after a couple of days. Hi, Gavin. We brought several rolls of film from our parents' work and covered the rooms with them. Then we spent a long time trying to figure out how to make the house work. It took a whole day of work, but there was what was worth it. The summer he didn't seem quite as unbearable. When we were basking in the cool water, Stacy had brought a bunch of those inflatable toys into the house. But I liked to swim alone in the hallways more. At those moments I felt like I was swimming in a real art gallery. And then Stacy suggested we throw a party. I felt like a horrible bore, but I spent a couple of days talking my friend out of it. I was so scared. It was one thing to swim there together, but inviting a bunch of people who could accidentally break something in someone else's house was a different matter entirely. Oh, if only Stacy could be talked out of it. In the end, we threw the party. We ordered a lot of great food, turned on the music. Hence all of our friends crowded into the house, even guys I didn't know at all. But most importantly, Dwight came to a guy Stacy really liked. I was horrified when I saw him. He was always causing trouble. Feeling upset, I swim away from everyone just to calm down. A little. Half an hour later, swimming past yet another room, I noticed something suspicious. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I asked a guy who was standing near the wall suspiciously. When he turned around, I realized two things. The first was it was Dwight, and the second thing was that he'd been doing something to the film on the wall. His hands had just near the tape that we've secured it all with fat. Was it? I'd had enough. Steve was the one who'd drawn the party, but if something went wrong, I was the one who'd be in trouble. I found my friend and loudly demanded that she send everyone home. Imagine my surprise when Stacy refused to do that. "Why are you such a bore, Billie? Let people have fun," she snorted arrogantly. I was hurt to tears, but there was nothing I could do, so I simply went home. The next day I had to start thoroughly cleaning everything, swim between the rooms, collecting garbage, and wait a minute. But there is little less water than there had been before. Worried, I told Stacy about it, but she only shrugged her shoulders indifferently. It probably evaporated. It is hot outside after all. Let's just pour some more water in. Luckily, the rest of the time Missile was on vacation house without any incident. It was just Stacy and I swimming around the house and pouring more water in. From time to time, I still felt hurt about the way she'd acted at the party, but she didn't seem to notice that at all. She was always on her phone, constantly smiling and giggling at the screen. Sometimes she told me how wonderful White was, so I decided that the party had been a success for her. Less and less time was left until Mrs. Hill was supposed to come back. We slowly started to drain the water and remove the film, and to my relief, we did everything carefully so the water didn't damage anything in the house. The rooms remained as immaculate as ever, but the whole time, for some reason I had a bad feeling. Just what had White been doing with the tape? In that room, and the day before Mrs. Hill's arrival, I decided to take one last look at all the rooms. I was walking through the hallways when I saw a door I had noticed before. I wondered what could be behind it, and when I opened the door I saw a staircase leading down, and when I walked down I felt my blood run cold. I was in a basement and it was filled deep with water tablets. It turned out the water hadn't been evaporating but simply pouring through the film and accumulating in the basement. But that wasn't the worst part. It looked like Mrs. Hill used the basement as a workshop and warehouse for her store. The room was filled with antique wooden furniture and it was all ruined. Terrified, I called Stacy because I urgently needed her help, but all I heard on the phone was, "Oh, I can't come at Dwight night. Anyway, I'll call you back." There was nothing I could do. I tried not to cry too much, and I started cleaning up the basement. First, I spent a long time bailing out the water with a bucket, and then I ran home to get a hairdryer and tried to dry the furniture for several hours. I thought I could restore it, but no, the wood had swollen up from the water and the printer became completely crooked. When I met Miss Hill at her house the next day, I felt deeply ashamed. She'd obviously missed me, and the honest I missed her too. She greeted me warmly and offered me a cup of tea, too. Worried about the basement, I refused, and I ran home. It took me several days to pluck up the courage to visit Mrs. Hill in her shop again, and when I came I saw that the old lady was very upset. As soon as I walked in, she started to complain that the ventilation system in her basement had apparently broken, which had caused all the expensive antique furniture to get wet. Terribly tormented. I just nodded my head and tried to comfort Mrs. Hill. But what happened next was the last straw for me. "Oh, I have a complete garden. I've brought you gifts," said Mrs. Hill, and then literally buried me in colorful gift boxes brought from her vacation. I'd never felt so ashamed in my life. I couldn't stand it, and I told her everything. I was so scared that Mrs. Hill would call my parents. I started to come up with excuses. It wasn't even my idea. I didn't mean to do it. It was all Stacy. I was expecting anything except what happened next. Mrs. Hill shook her head and said that I shouldn't make excuses and blame everything on my friend. I had to take responsibility for my actions. She also said she wouldn't tell my parents anything. However, I would have to help run the store and in the workshop to somehow work off the damaged furniture. At first, I was terribly upset. But then something amazing happened. I came to the shop every day and learned more and more about antique furniture. In the evenings, we would go down to Mrs. Hill's basement. She taught me how to apply furnish, showed me how to recognize different types of woods and upholstery. And as for me, I've never been so interested in anything before. When I woke up in the morning, all I wanted to do was run to Mrs. Hill as soon as possible, and in the evening I didn't want to go home at all. It was that work at the end that made my summer holidays the best. I'd found a new favorite hobby and perhaps even a future profession. I'm going to grow up and become a restorer, just like Mrs. Hill. I talked to Stacy less and less because I realized she was really a bad friend and an even worse influence on me. As for the sea, I wanted to go see it so much. I shouldn't have even gotten upset about it. After only a month, Mrs. Hilton, that I was wonderful, even the best worker felt to thank me and make me happy. She suggested that we fly to the sea together, and that's how the best holidays in my life ended.